The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. She stood with her arms crossed, her heart pounding against her ribs, but her face remained cold. Across the room, he sat motionless on the edge of their bed, staring at the floor. The weight of her words lingered between them like an unspoken tragedy. "I want a divorce." She had rehearsed the line in her head 100 times, imagined the arguments, the shouting, maybe even tears. She had braced herself for anger or pleading, for any reaction that might make her feel justified in what she was doing. Instead, she was met with something much worse. Silence. Her husband, David, simply inhaled slowly, exhaled, and stood up. His gaze lifted to meet hers, and for the first time in years, she couldn't read his expression. No frustration, no sadness, no fight. Just emptiness. "Okay," he said quietly. No argument. No questions. No desperate attempts to change her mind. Just that single word. Okay. A strange sense of unease crept over her. She had expected a storm, not this unsettling calm. Before she could say anything, he turned, walked to the closet, and pulled out a small duffel bag. His movements were smooth, deliberate, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. "Wait, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice not as firm as before. "Packing," he replied simply, placing a few shirts and jeans inside the bag. "I'll be out of your way soon." A lump formed in her throat. She had spent months thinking about this, convincing herself it was the right decision. Their marriage had been strained for years. The late nights, the distant stares, the conversations that felt like formalities rather than real connections. They had become strangers living under the same roof. She had wanted freedom, a fresh start. But she had not expected him to make it so easy. "You're leaving?" "Just like that?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her tone. He zipped up the bag and slung it over his shoulder. "You wanted this, right?" She swallowed hard. "I thought we'd talk about it. Work through the details." "No need," he said, stepping toward the door. "I won't fight you on this. I just want you to be happy." Her breath caught in her throat. Something about his words sent a shiver down her spine. He wasn't just walking out of their home, he was walking out of her life. And he wasn't looking back. "David, wait," she called out, but he was already halfway down the stairs. The sound of the front door unlocking sent a wave of panic through her. She had expected relief, a sense of triumph. Instead, she felt something else. Something foreign and terrifying. Regret. The door clicked shut behind him, and she rushed to the window, her fingers trembling as she pulled the curtain aside. His silhouette disappeared into the night, swallowed by the quiet streets. No hesitation. No farewell. Just silence. The house felt different without him. The absence of his presence was more suffocating than his presence had ever been. For the first time in years, she had the bed to herself, the remote control in her hand, the entire house free of compromise. And yet, sleep evaded her. Days turned into weeks, and still, he did not call, did not return to collect anything he had left behind. No texts, no emails, no attempts at closure. It was as if he had erased himself from her life entirely. Friends asked about him, and all she could do was shrug, pretending she was fine. But the truth gnawed at her. Why had he walked away so easily? Curiosity turned into unease, unease into obsession. She checked his social media, nothing. No updates, no pictures, not even an indication of where he had gone. Mutual friends had no answers, claiming they hadn't seen him either. And then, one evening, she received a message. It was from an unknown number. 3 simple words flashed on her screen. "Are you sure?" Her hands went cold. Her pulse raced. She stared at the screen, her mind spinning. Was it him? Her fingers trembled as she typed back, "David? Is that you?" No response. She waited, her heart pounding, but the message remained unread. Something was wrong. She could feel it deep in her bones. David was gone. And yet, somehow, he was still there. The days stretched into an eerie quiet, but her mind refused to rest. Every sound in the house felt louder, every shadow seemed darker. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. One evening, as she sat scrolling through old photos, a faint knock echoed through the house. Her breath hitched. It was late, too late for visitors. She hesitated before approaching the door, her pulse quickening. Through the peephole, she saw nothing. No one. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Slowly, she cracked the door open, just enough to see outside. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the steps. And then she saw it. A small box sat on the doorstep. With trembling hands, she picked it up and brought it inside. The box was unmarked, sealed only with a single strip of tape. Heart hammering, she peeled it open. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper. And a single key. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the note. "You don't know the whole story." Her breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was David's. A fresh wave of fear crashed over her. He was gone, so why did it feel like he was still watching her? Her gaze fell to the key, its metallic surface gleaming under the dim light. It was unfamiliar. Not a house key, not one she had ever seen before. Her mind swirled with questions. Was this a clue? A warning? Or something far more sinister? She clenched the key in her palm. There was only one way to find out. And she wasn't sure she was ready for the truth. The key burned in her palm. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. She knew she should throw it away, walk away from whatever mystery David had left behind. But curiosity gnawed at her. That night, sleep eluded her again. The key sat on the nightstand, its presence as heavy as the unanswered questions suffocating her mind. Where did it lead? Why had he sent it? By morning, she had made a decision. She was going to find out. She traced the key's ridges with her fingertips, her pulse quickening. There was only one place it could belong to, David's old storage unit. A place he hadn't visited in years. She drove there, her hands gripping the wheel. The building loomed ahead, its cold metal doors lined up like secrets waiting to be uncovered. As she slid the key into the lock, a sense of dread washed over her. The door creaked open. And what she saw inside made her stomach drop. The storage unit smelled of dust and time. A single bare bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows against the metal walls. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she stepped inside, her fingers trembling. Boxes stacked neatly along the walls. Some labeled with dates. Others unmarked. But it was what stood in the center of the unit that made her knees go weak. A desk. And on it, an old leather-bound journal. Her hands shook as she reached for it. The cover bore David's initials, the leather worn from years of use. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the first few pages. And then her breath caught in her throat. Page after page, filled with words she never expected to read. I knew she would leave me. I just didn't know when. Her fingers gripped the edges of the book. The handwriting, his handwriting, was rushed, filled with raw emotion. She thinks I don't see it. The way she looks past me. The way she sighs when she thinks I'm not listening. I lost her a long time ago. But I still love her. Her stomach twisted. She turned the page. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to fight. So when she finally says the words, I will let her go. Tears blurred her vision. This wasn't a man who had given up. This was a man who had already made peace with losing her. But the next entry sent a chill down her spine. She doesn't know what I know. She doesn't know what I've done. Her breath hitched. The words beneath were smudged, as if his hands had been shaking while writing them. If she ever finds this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell her myself. And she needs to know. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She flipped to the last page, her fingers trembling. And then, written in dark ink, was a single line. I had to disappear to keep her safe. The journal slipped from her hands. A rush of cold air passed through the unit, making the bulb above her flicker wildly. Her mind raced. Safe from what? From who? And then she heard it. A slow, deliberate step just outside the storage unit. She wasn't alone. Her breath hitched as the footsteps stopped just outside the storage unit. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to turn around. A shadow loomed at the entrance. Then, a figure stepped into the dim light. David. Her heart stopped. He was thinner, his face worn with exhaustion, but it was him. Alive. Standing right in front of her. David, her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. He lifted a hand, signaling her to stay silent. His eyes darted toward the hallway, listening. Then, with quiet urgency, he stepped forward and shut the storage unit door behind him. You weren't supposed to find this, he said, his voice low but firm. What is this? What does it mean? She asked, her hands clutching the journal. He exhaled, running a hand through his unkempt hair. I had no choice. I had to disappear. For your sake. Disappear from what? Who are you hiding from? She demanded, frustration overtaking her fear. His gaze softened. From people I never should have crossed. She shook her head. David, stop being cryptic. Tell me the truth. He hesitated, then motioned for her to sit on an old wooden crate. He took a deep breath, as if preparing for something painful. Before we met, I worked for someone dangerous. A man who made problems disappear. I was young, desperate for money, and I didn't ask questions. But one night, I saw something I shouldn't have. Something that could destroy him. Her blood ran cold. What did you see? Enough to get me killed. He looked away. I tried to walk away. But he made it clear, if I left, I would never be safe. And neither would anyone I loved. She inhaled sharply. That's why you left me. David nodded. I thought that if I disappeared, they'd forget. But when you filed for divorce, they noticed. They knew you would start looking for me. That's when I realized, I wasn't the only one in danger anymore. Her hands trembled as she clutched the journal. So what now? Are they still watching us? David glanced toward the door, his body tense. We don't have much time. We need to leave. Together. Leave? Where? She shook her head. I can't just disappear. My life. Your life will end if we stay, he cut in, his voice urgent. I never wanted this for you. But now, you have no choice. If they find out you know, they won't let you walk away. A lump formed in her throat. Everything she knew, everything she had built, was slipping through her fingers. But then she looked at him, at the man she had loved, the man she thought she had lost forever. And she realized the truth. No amount of anger, no divorce papers, no years of separation could erase what they once had. Okay, she whispered, standing up. Let's go. Relief washed over his face. He took her hand, squeezing it tightly, before pulling open the storage unit door. The hallway was empty. For now. With one last glance at the life she was leaving behind, she stepped into the darkness beside him, knowing there was no turning back. David took a deep breath, his gaze flickering to the shadows beyond the storage unit. The air was thick with tension, but Sarah could tell, this was his moment of truth. "Before I met you," he began, voice hoarse, "I was part of something I didn't understand until it was too late. It started as a simple job, delivering messages, handling payments. But the deeper I got, the more I realized I was working for someone who didn't let people walk away." Sarah gripped the edge of the crate, her pulse racing. Who was he? His name was Marcus Vance. David's jaw tightened. A businessman on the surface, but in reality, he was a fixer. If someone had a problem, financial, legal, personal, he made it disappear. I thought I was just running errands. Then, one night, I saw him make a person disappear for good. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "You saw him kill someone?" David nodded. "And he saw me see it. That's when my life changed. He gave me a choice, keep working for him, or join the man he just buried. I played along for a while, but I knew I couldn't stay. The moment I met you, I started looking for a way out." Sarah's heart clenched. "And that's when you disappeared." "I faked my death, erased everything, and ran. I thought I was safe." He shook his head. "But when you filed for divorce, my name resurfaced. Vance's people must have started watching you, waiting for you to lead them to me." Sarah swallowed hard. "Then we have to go. Now." David nodded. "We need a plan. And I know just the place." They exited the storage unit cautiously, moving through the dimly lit corridor. The moment they stepped outside, Sarah felt it, a presence, watching. David stiffened beside her. "Keep walking. Act normal." They reached the parking lot, but before they could get into Sarah's car, a sleek black sedan turned the corner, its headlights flashing over them. Sarah's breath caught. David grabbed her hand. "Run." They sprinted down the alley, their footsteps echoing against the brick walls. The car screeched to a halt behind them. A man stepped out, dressed in a dark suit, his hand slipping into his jacket. "Gun." David pulled Sarah down an intersecting street just as a gunshot cracked the air. They ducked behind a dumpster, hearts hammering. Sarah's mind raced. "What do we do?" David pulled out a phone, one Sarah didn't recognize. "We need help. I have one last favor to call in." An hour later, they arrived at a remote cabin deep in the woods. The tension between them was thick, but David's exhaustion was evident. "We'll be safe here for a while." Sarah crossed her arms. "Who did you call?" David hesitated. "An old friend. Someone who knows how to make people disappear." Before she could press further, a car engine rumbled outside. David peered through the window. "That's him." A tall man in a leather jacket stepped out, his expression unreadable. "David. Long time." "Mark," David said. "We need new identities. We need out." Mark nodded. "It's doable. But there's a price." Sarah's stomach twisted. "What price?" Mark's gaze darkened. "Vance already knows you're here. He put a bounty on both of you. The only way out is to deal with him directly." David's face paled. "That's suicide." "Then start running," Mark said coldly. "Because they're already coming." The cabin windows shattered as bullets tore through the walls. Sarah hit the floor, covering her head. David grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back door. "Go," he shouted. They burst into the woods, the sound of footsteps closing in. Sarah's lungs burned, her heart hammering. She risked a glance back, figures in the darkness, closing fast. David turned sharply, leading her toward an abandoned hunting shack. They ducked inside, pressing against the wall as the footsteps neared. Then, silence. Sarah barely breathed. Then a voice rang out. "Come on, David. You know there's no escape." Marcus Vance. David tensed. "Stay here. No matter what." Sarah's grip tightened. "No, we do this together." David hesitated, then nodded. He stepped out first, hands raised. "I don't have anything left, Marcus. Just let her go." Marcus smirked, his gun raised. "You know it doesn't work like that." Sarah's mind raced. Then she saw it, one of the guards standing near an exposed gas canister. Her eyes met David's. He saw it too. In a single motion, David lunged for Marcus while Sarah grabbed a rock and hurled it at the canister. A spark ignited. Fire erupted between them and Marcus's men. David grabbed Sarah. "Run!" They sprinted through the trees as the flames spread. Behind them, Marcus shouted orders, but the fire had already consumed the shack. A few miles later, exhausted and covered in soot, they collapsed by the side of an empty road. David turned to her. "We did it." Sarah exhaled, staring at him. "What now?" David looked toward the horizon. "We disappear. For real this time. Together." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt something close to hope. They stood, hand in hand, and walked toward the unknown, this time, as partners, ready for whatever came next. The road stretched ahead, silent and unfamiliar. Sarah and David trudged forward, exhaustion in every step. But something still felt wrong. Marcus Vance had always been too calculated to die that easily. A car approached in the distance. David stiffened, pulling Sarah toward the trees. The vehicle slowed down, headlights scanning the road. Sarah whispered, "Do you think it's them?" David's jaw clenched. "We can't take chances." The car passed without stopping, but the paranoia lingered. They needed a new identity, a new life. David pulled out the phone again, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "We need an exit plan. Now." A week later, Sarah and David sat in a rundown motel under assumed names. Their escape was almost complete. Mark had arranged for new passports, a boat waiting at the docks. But as they stepped outside, Sarah froze. A figure stood at the end of the street. Familiar. Watching. Marcus Vance. Alive. David turned sharply, his body shielding Sarah. "Run." She hesitated, fear gripping her. But then, Vance smiled, lifting his hands. "You didn't think it'd be that easy, did you? The final game had just begun."